Okay, so we were finishing up chapter 2 of the Song of Songs. And so tonight I want to link that into an overview of where we're going in chapter 3. We're not going to be dealing exclusively with chapter 3 because, like I said, I want to wrap some things up from chapter 2. In terms of prophecy, chapter 3 builds on that. It builds heavily on that understanding. And so let's review. I think we've had, we had a whole lesson on the hours that not even the angels know. And then we reviewed those. We did just a quick review. And for those of you who were wanting a PDF, I've not attached a PDF. I think it's a PNG, maybe. It's some sort of picture file, but I've already embedded it into the links that go out after class. I've already put those 3 charts in that the email that'll go out with tonight's links. So when you open up the links for tonight's class, it'll have that in there for you. Okay. And of course, always feel free to take the screenshots. That's all I did, really. I pulled the frame up of the PowerPoint, took a screenshot, it makes it into a JPEG or a PNG or whatever it's called. And that's all I did. I just attached that. But because I had it full screen, it might have been clearer maybe than what you could have gotten on a screenshot. So who's going to be homeroom mom tonight? Or dad? I don't mind.
I can do it, Halisa. It's Danielle.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Screen. And it looks like we're on lesson 89. I even put a note as to where I should start back, which I wish I did every time. All right, this is the verse we were working with because where we left off, we had looked at the hours and then we wanted to look at the watches of the night, because the watches of the night, they hint to the saying of the Shema. And so when you think of what is included in the Gospels, they said all the things Yeshua did, books couldn't contain everything that Yeshua did, which is pretty cool, because I intend, even though they didn't write the books, I'm going to talk to the people who walked with him and say, tell me all those stories. I love stories. So tell me all the stories of all the things he did that didn't get recorded. But we know that what did get recorded in the Gospels was so important that frequently you will find the same account in 2 Gospels, 3 Gospels, maybe even in all 4 Gospels. They might be told from a slightly different point of view. They might give you the interaction from another angle, which enhances that 360-degree or 3D view of what actually happened. But when things are recorded in the Gospels, it's because, again, space is precious. Adonai doesn't waste space with unimportant details. So the things that he chose to record for us in the Gospels that Yeshua said, these are direct things Yeshua said. It's not an apostle writing an epistle, not that we're diminishing that, but in terms of weight, Yeshua for me is so much easier to understand than apostles writing to congregations who are having problems that are not always so clearly defined to us. Like, what is actually going on? Every now and then it'll tell you what the problem is. But so often you can tell that you're getting in on the tail end of a conversation when you're reading the letters of the apostles. And so with Yeshua, they usually give a very thorough record of the interaction. How did this start? What was said? Who said it? How did they say it? What happened afterward? How did Yeshua explain it afterward to the disciples? And so in this case, in Luke 12:37-40, when Yeshua describes, or I would say warns, exhorts his disciples to stay alert for his return, the words that he chooses and the words that are recorded in the Gospels, they're very specific. He didn't tell us things that would be unimportant later. He gave us the very things that would be important later. So as far as I'm concerned, what he's writing here is something very important, and it is later, at least for me. And so I need to understand these words. That's the point of chasing down. Why is it important to know what the hours of the temple are? Why is it important to know what the watches of the night are? Because Yeshua talks about them. Because Yeshua acts upon these. And so often we impose a 2,000-year-old modern reality into this original reality, the way that it was understood, practiced, recorded, observed in the time that this was written. So here's what he says. Blessed are those slaves. And again, when he says slaves, he often told parables of slaves. If you had to think of a feast out of the three, there's three Chagim, there's Passover, there's Shavuot, there's Sukkot. If you had to think of those, one of those three main Chagim, right? And remember the whole conversation that Pharaoh and Moses are going back and forth in their negotiation as Moses is saying, let us go out in the wilderness and celebrate a Chag. There is a particular feast he wants Israel to go and to observe. Not just the men, not just the men and the women, but everybody, the whole family, even the livestock. He says everybody has to go. Right? So if these three things are important, these three Chagim, and we would assume Moses is probably talking about some sort of a Passover celebration, the timetable of when the negotiation started, the plagues and all that. I don't even know. I've read things that say this was the timetable, but I don't know. But since this is in the setting of Passover, let's just allow that. Okay, we can move it anytime we need to if we get more evidence. But the negotiation there at Passover is between Pharaoh and slaves. Pharaoh and slaves. So when Yeshua tells these parables of the slaves, then one thing we might want to entertain the idea that this would have a Passover context, right? And if it has a Passover context, then we know that it's intimately related to the other feasts as well. It's Passover is like a door you go through, and that's not intended to be a pun, but it kind of is. When you think of the blood on the doorpost, Passover kind of is a door that you go through. Narrow is the way, right? You go through that gate. You go through that door, and you will arrive at the Feast of Unleavened Bread. If you continue through that door, you will arrive at first fruits. If you continue through that door, you will arrive at Shavuot. If you continue through that door, you will arrive at the Feast of Trumpets and Yom Kippur, and finally Sukkot. So Passover it gets you on the path. And so when Yeshua is using examples of servants or slaves in this parable, that's the first thing I think of. Oh, this may have a Passover context. Just like we've been saying, Passover and Sukkot, they're intricately related. They're intertwined because they went from the Passover to Sukkot, Ramses, Sukkot. So they entered into those clouds of glory or Sukkot of glory right after Passover. And so scripture wants us to associate these two feasts in particular. So here's the parable. Blessed are those slaves whom the master will find on the alert when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will prepare himself to serve and have them recline at the table, and he will come up and serve them. All right. Now think of this. They're slaves. and there's a master. Well, up to this point, if we're thinking of Passover, Pharaoh has been the master, and they have had taskmasters. But Yeshua says there's going to be a changing of the guard here. Like our theme at Jacob's tent for Passover, it's, from bondage to bond servants. He didn't just give you total freedom to do everything you wanted. He freed you from Pharaoh in order to become his bondservant. Right? So that's the context there. So he says, if the master comes, right? Is he talking about Pharaoh at this point? Probably not, because they have gone from the Pharaoh master to the master of the universe. And he says, he will come. And so you need to be on the alert. That's why I say, if you go through your Passover Haggadah, if it is Orthodox, just count up how many times it says about midnight. So there's something about the night watches and Passover that is important. It actually is too. In Shavuot and the fall feast, there's this tradition, staying up all night and studying. But for sure, in the text itself, about midnight is going to be an important time, because it's going to be toward the conclusion of the first watch. So he says, you need to be on the alert. He says, truly, I say to you that he will prepare himself to serve and have them recline at the table. This is a turnaround in a lot of the parables that Yeshua taught about how, the master doesn't serve the servant serves the master, and then the servant serves himself. Well, this particular parable, he's making a different point. He's saying, the master himself is going to prepare himself to serve, and then the servant will have them recline at the table, and he will come up and serve them. That helps us recall the meal that Yeshua had with his disciples. Remember him washing their feet, remember how he's kind of guiding in terms of he's supplied everything. Right? He tells them where to go. He says, follow this guy and you're going to find everything you need there. Everything is already going to be prepared for you. The master of the house is going to be preparing this for you. He's giving them all kinds of hints in the context of this parable. And the servants in this parable recline at the table. The particular feast that you're expected to recline at the table, of course, is the Passover Seder, right? And they are going to be served. Well, if we think of the first Passover, how were they served? Well, he provided a lamb. He gave them the flocks that they brought out of the promised land when they went down to Egypt, and those flocks thrived. And so he is supplying them what he has already served them. But in terms of the Lamb of God, Yeshua, the Lamb, what is he doing? He is serving them. He is providing them exactly what they need to share in this sacrificial meal. And then he gives us this information, whether he comes in the second watch or even in the third and finds them so. Blessed are those slaves, right? Which slaves? Which slaves is he talking about? Well, he started out with blessing. They're on the alert. These are the particular slaves that he's interested in. They're going to be on the alert. They're going to be prepared, right? And they're going to be those who are reclining at the table and being served. Now, he says, if this describes you, whether the master comes in the second watch or even the third and finds them so what? Exactly what he just said. They're reclining at the table, which we specifically associate with Passover. And he is serving them himself. And this says they're alert. They're expecting something to happen. They're not just having a fun meal with family. They understand at this chag or at any chag to be on the alert, because they're not just historical commemorations, they are literal rehearsals. They're prophetic rehearsals for this hour that they don't know, but they know it's possible that he could come in the second watch or even in the third watch of the night. And so if he finds them alert, if he finds them reclined, let's just say at the Passover table, blessed are those slaves. But be sure of this, if the head of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have allowed his house to be broken into. You too be ready, because the Son of Man is coming at an hour that you do not think he will. All right, and that was the point in the last lesson of presenting both the hours as months in that chart. Remember the chart? Showing that an hour is not always 60 minutes, that sometimes an hour can just be an appointed action time. Sometimes an hour can be a whole month. You have to know the context to know the particular type of hour that's being addressed. So is he saying this will come in a particular 60-minute hour? Is he saying this will come in a watch of the night? The context is a watch of a night. Or is he saying, you don't know what month he's coming? Because remember, an hour can also be a month. So we might be expecting him in the 7th hour, the month of Tishrei, right? That's what we think is going to happen. That's what Paul tells us is going to happen. He's very specific. He's giving us every Feast of Trumpets signal you can give. But there's an additional hint here, because if we don't know the hour, he says, you don't think I'm coming at this hour, but you're going to know how to be prepared. You're going to know how to be alert for this hour. You're going to be reclining at a table at this hour, but you just won't think I'm coming at that hour. Right. Now, does that push aside the Feast of Trumpets as a resurrection day? I don't think so. I think he's telling us be alert at every hour, at every appointed time. Because like I say, Passover might be a gate that you need to go through. It might be an open door that you need to go through. Like Yeshua said, there's going to be, if he opens a door, nobody can close it. If he closes the door, nobody can open it. And that's a little scary, because we know there's going to be people trying to get in that door, but they'll be too late. They did not know the hour. In other words, you say, well, nobody knows the hour. They didn't recognize that appointed time. They didn't know when to be alert. And because they didn't know when to be alert, they failed to be alert. And so when we keep the feast, we have to think this is way more important than just ticking off a box of commandments. Every feast I enter into, from Passover, from reclining at the table at the Seder, all the way over to the fall feast, to the Feast of Trumpets, I need to be on the alert. And Yeshua is really kind of, I would call it cagey with this language, because he kind of switches. He says, if the head of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have allowed his house to be broken into. So you two be ready, because the Son of Man is coming in an hour that you don't think he will. So if you don't think he will come at that hour, nevertheless, you're on the alert, because you know the hours, you know the appointed times. Then you're going to be prepared. Right? And so this idea of sending everybody in one direction, and I don't think it's to intentionally mislead anyone, because Yeshua is giving us every clue. Like I say, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, they'll tell you in a nutshell, just keep the feast and the Sabbath, guard your salvation, and you're going to be fine. You'll be on the alert. That's the nutshell. But sometimes we get so bogged down in the doctrines of the feast and prophecy, because we want to be out there ahead of somebody else in terms of prophecy. And we know he's coming at the Feast of Trumpets. But what if, like I said, if he shortens the days, what if something is clicked into place, like Yeshua is saying right here? Because he's hinting that there's going to be people who won't be ready. Their house got broken into. And had they known he was coming at that hour, they would have probably been more on the alert. So there's no discounting the feasts, any one of them. They're equally important. And so we don't just run over Passover and say that's already been fulfilled. Don't do that. Passover is being fulfilled because you still every year have to insert yourself personally in the Passover when you tell the story. If you didn't insert yourself personally in the Passover, you weren't very alert, because you have to tell the story that way so that you will be on the alert when he comes, so that you won't allow your house to be broken into. I don't know exactly what that means, but Yeshua does. All right, so let's head back to where we're kind of knew we were going to begin with. And this is from the Mishnah, from Berachot 2a, if you want to look it up. But this is pretty much the gist of it. It's a discussion of, when do you say the Shema? We know the Shema is important. Yeshua verified, validated, it's the greatest commandment. So keeping the feast is important, but reciting the Shema morning and evening, according to Yeshua, is still the greatest thing in terms of commandment. So they're asking the question, this is the greatest commandment. It pays to ask questions about the greatest commandment. It says, from when? That is, from what time does one recite Shema in the evening? You're going to recite it evening and morning. So they're saying, if this is so important, if this is the greatest commandment, then when do we do it precisely? When is it too early? When is it too late? And if you've been doing this a while, you've probably run into that question yourself. Maybe you got held up late somewhere on the job. Maybe you needed to go to bed early, for some reason. And so the rabbis, of course, they've had all these questions for thousands of years. They've been working on them. And so they discuss them. They record the discussion. So they say, from the time when the priests enter to partake of their teruma, their part of the offerings, until when does the time for the recitation of the evening Shema extend? It says, until the end of the first watch. Right? So we know there's going to be 3 watches. Yeshua only mentioned the second, and possibly he said even the third. When he talks about the Son of Man's return, he doesn't mention the first watch. Yeah, you can get her. She's asleep, but she won't be long if she knows you're here. He doesn't mention the first watch, but he says the second or even the third. So these times of the Shema, that's a great question for us to ask, because all our schedules are different. We might be in completely different shifts, maybe from one week to the next, or one quarter to the next, or even in some cases from one day to the next. So you want to hammer this out. You don't want to leave this out, because you're affirming this greatest commandment. So he says, until the end of the first watch. Now, remember, the watches of the night are just like the hours of the day, the temple hours of the day. They go from sunup to sundown, and then you divide by 12. So they're not an exact hour. There might be a day of the year where it would turn out to be an exact hour, but for the most part, you're dealing with fragments of hours. Okay. So same thing with the watches of the night, but instead of dividing it into 12 hours, you're going to divide it into 3 watches. So your first watch is going to be from sundown until it's going to be about midnight. All right, again, it's going to be more or less because the length of the nights won't be constant as we go through the seasons. So he says, if you're going to do the evening Shema, you need to get it done. And it's best to get it done before the end of the first watch, about midnight. Right? And they say the term used in the Torah from Deuteronomy 6:7 to indicate the time for the recitation of the evening Shema is b'shach b'cha, when you lie down, which refers to the time in which individuals go to sleep, which back then they didn't have as much electronic stimulation as we do. We just flip on the lights and we stay up. Or we read our iPhones because they've got lights on them, right? But at any rate, they would have gone to sleep much earlier. So when you lie down, they say this is the time in which you go to sleep. Therefore, it says the time for the recitation of the Shema is the first portion of the night, when individuals typically prepare for sleep. Right. So in trying to decipher what Yeshua is talking about here, he says the second watch, even the third, Son of Man, if the Son of Man returns. Then why would he not mention the first watch of the night? Sometimes something is conspicuous because it's not mentioned. Well, if Yeshua is trying to make the point, it could be any time. Even if he's saying it could be any time in the night, why not say first, second, or third? He doesn't. You notice what's not there sometimes. So why not the first one? Well, in the first watch of the night, the practice was under normal conditions, you would recite the Shema in the first watch of the night. Okay. And then the Mishnah goes into a discussion like, well, what if you miss it? Can you do it in the second watch? What if you miss it? Can you do it in the third watch? So this discussion for us is beneficial because it could happen to us. Now, Yeshua is talking about one particular night in the history of the entire universe, right? He's saying, okay, there's going to be one particular night. Every night you do the Shema. Every morning you do the Shema. But there will be one particular night watch where it will be really important for you to obey the greatest commandment, to say the Shema when you're preparing to go to bed and when you arise. Okay, so let's continue and look at a more detailed opinion. Why are they discussing this? Because like we said, life can happen. And this is from Berachot 2a. The discussion here says, well, you can recite it until midnight. But they're looking at Leviticus 7:15. So they say, however, according to the law of the burnt offering, which could burn until morning, technically, the Shema could be recited all the way up until dawn. Not after dawn, but all the way up until dawn. The custom of midnight, the rabbis set into place in order to prevent laxity that might lead to omission. You know, if you prolong a commandment, remember hurrying the commandment, why did they look for a field for the barley sheaves so close to the temple, so close to Jerusalem? Because you don't want anything to happen that will interfere between the cutting of the sheaves and bringing them into the temple. When you know to do a commandment, you don't delay, you hurry. You hurry to fulfill it. So in this case, they say it's the same thing with the greatest commandment. If you know to say the Shema, then don't put it off. Right? If you know you're in that time period of the first watch of the night, go ahead and do it, because you might be distracted. What if you get that phone call? You know, family members in the emergency room, you got to run down there, right? And you've run down there and then it's serious. And one thing leads to another. And before you know it, it's sunrise and you miss the chance to fulfill the greatest commandment. And they're saying this is what they wanted to avoid, a situation in which you just prolonged something. What if you went to a party, right? And hopefully you're not going to these kinds of parties, but back then you would go to a wedding party for a week. I mean, your perception could be altered if you partied for a week at a wedding. Things got pretty wild at sheep shearing and at harvest, at the threshing floors. The threshing floors and the sheep shearing in ancient times could often be pretty wild parties. There's a lot going on in the story of Ruth and people lying down on the threshing floor, because most likely, like it says, his heart was merry when he lay down, because they've been drinking. That's what they did. They just blew off a lot of steam at those particular occasions. So they say, what if you got into that situation? You're at a wedding party and you're feasting, you're drinking with your friends, you're dancing, you're cheering up the bride and the groom. And having been in Jerusalem and watching a wedding party of yeshiva boys, and I did not think they could just generate one more verse of a song and dance one more step, and then they would just take off again, like it was the first time. Like, these boys are going to be up all night. I don't know if that young man's going to be able to go meet his bride or not. So these practices sometimes we're removed from them, and we don't realize what a great danger this would be on certain occasions, that you would get caught up at a special occasion and you would forget to do the Shema. And all of a sudden it would be sunrise and you weren't able to fulfill that because you didn't hurry the commandment. So Yeshua says that even the third watch, right? He knows the practice is to get it done in the first watch if you can. But he says, you know what? You could get it done in the second watch. You could even get it done in the third watch. The suggestion here is he's hinting that there might be stragglers, right? If you said the Shema in the first watch, no big deal. You're prepared, you're alert. You fulfilled the commandment, you hurried the commandment. Or as he say, he shortens the days for the sake of the elect. There's an interaction there between the righteous who are alert and who are conscious, who have an expectation and they get the commandments done. They just get them done. They don't delay. But some people delay. Yeshua addressed the assembly of Laodicea, the seventh assembly. And as the seventh assembly, they would be identified with the seventh day or the seventh feast, like waiting till the last day, waiting till the last hour. He says, I wish you were hot or cold, but you're lukewarm and this isn't going to go well. You don't wait till the last minute. You don't be lukewarm. Don't be tepid. There's nothing worse than tepid water, right? Well, there's nothing worse than a tepid believer, one who delays to perform the commandment. So, but he says, you know what? If you're a straggler, second watch, you could get it done then. If you're a real straggler, you could get it done in the third watch, but the danger of doing it in the third watch of the night is that the time may actually flip over and you won't know it, because as these rabbis are discussing in their texts, the problem with knowing the watches of the night is that you can't see anything. It's not like you can watch a sundial, right? And so they say that you can only know the watches of the night through hearing. They say that sound is what is emphasized to mark the watches of the night. They said, well, no, there's a morning star, but if you'll remember, that star is up there for a long time. And it's going to still be visible after sunup. That's one thing I enjoyed do when I did have to work morning watch out at the prison, before everything gets moving, to just be able to look up in the stars and see that morning star and know the end of my shift is very soon. but everybody else is just getting up. And so that morning star is a transition time, but you could very well miss sunup because the morning, Yeshua is the morning star, but you could still miss the appointed time. Because there can be an obscurity. What if you can't see this star if it's obscured by clouds, right? So they say, because of this uncertainty of using your eyes to know the watches of the night, therefore the signs of the watches are in sounds. They emphasize the sounds of the night. And by recognizing these sounds, they say you will know which watch you're in. And if, you're hearing the sounds of the second watch, you say, oh man, I'm late. Let me do the Shema. But there are certain sounds, once you hear them, you know the night's over and you missed it. And that's why they say, don't wait until the third watch. But Yeshua said, it could be, even the third watch, but don't do that. Don't wait that late. Now, I want to take a sneak peek into chapter 3, but I want to read 4 verses. I don't want to read just one verse like we've been doing, taking one verse and breaking it down week after week. I want to take a look at the whole context because it has to do with the night watches we've been talking about. So in chapter 3, starting with verse 1, we have this seeking and finding. The bride, it's the night watches. The bride doesn't know where her groom is. This person whom her soul loves, she doesn't know where he is. It's the night watches. She can't see him. Right now, if you think of what the greatest commandment tells us to do, the Shema says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul. So if you are seeking the one whom your soul loves, it's linking you directly to the Shema. The Shema is a process twice a day for every single one of us to seek the one whom our soul loves. Why would we say the Shema if our soul didn't love him? Now, granted, if you do it before coffee, you may not feel it that intensely, but you're being faithful because love is not a feeling. It's based on it is written. There's an action that's associated with it. So you will seek him even before coffee, right? Anyway, it says, on my bed, night after night, I sought him, whom my soul loves. I sought him, but did not find him. Think of how many nights on our beds we have said the Shema night after night, and he didn't come. But because we loved him with all our souls, we sought him with the Shema night after night. So she says, I must arise now. I must arise. There's our arise word. Remember when you see rise up, arise, come up, go up, you're getting a resurrection hint right here. She says, I must arise now and go around in the city, in the streets, and in the public squares. I must seek him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but did not find him. Now, this is heartbreaking. She's been seeking him night after night on her bed, but she didn't find him, right? This is kind of what we do. We know Yeshua is there, but we don't see him. But nevertheless, night after night, we seek him because we love him. But there will come a time where we say, it's not enough just to lie down and say the Shema. I must arise. It's time to arise, to go around in the city, in the streets, and which city? There's only one city where you would seek Yeshua. If you arise, there is one city in which you will seek Yeshua. when Yeshua himself was resurrected in the Gospels, doesn't it tell us that many of the saints from ancient times were seen walking around the holy city and appeared to many, which had to have been incredible. I don't know how they knew. I mean, how would you know that was Noah? Wet feet? I don't know. But they knew that these were the saints of old walking around the holy city. They knew for them it was time to arise. This was like a pre-resurrection resurrection. It was a first fruits. Ooh. And so we seek him in Jerusalem. This is the city of the feast. And we know we must seek him whom our soul loves at the feasts. We know we must seek him whom our soul loves in Jerusalem. Now, in this particular case, she says, I sought him, but I did not find him. Why couldn't she find him? Well, we get a little bit of an explanation. It says the watchmen who make the rounds, right? And I'll put the Hebrew word, the transliteration there in brackets, because that's important. If you know what we've been studying about the rivers of Eden, the Garden of Eden, how the rivers of Eden circle, they survive the garden, how the spirit of Adonai circled the garden, survive, how the manna encircled the camp, survive. So when we see survive, or this circling, the rounds, they already have a context. They have a context with the feasts. They have a context with the rivers of Eden. They have a context with the seven spirits of Adonai. Because what we're doing when we look at survive, and I don't want to chase this down tonight, but maybe one day we will, because we'll go back and we'll look at the Ezekiel's wheels, the chariots of the Ophanim, the fiery chariot, and how that's pictured by the rivers of Eden. But the idea is they are wheels because it's the will of the Holy One that turns the wheels. And so if he turns those wheels according to appointed times, right? He didn't say just say the Shema anytime you feel like it. He didn't say recite the Shema when you eat asparagus. No, he gave us something very specific. We don't make up our own rules, because what's going to happen if you stick your hand between the wheels on your own time schedule? It'd be like Nadav and Avihu. They kind of set their own time schedule. Didn't go well because they were consumed by that fire. So who is going to help us make the rounds? The watchman. The watchman will always make the rounds. And so Hasovevim, who is a watchman? A watchman or woman is going to be someone who knows the appointed times. If you know the appointed times, you understand the rivers of Eden, you understand the spirit of Adonai, you understand the spirit moving according to those appointed times. So if you find the watchman making the rounds, Hasovavim, making the circuits in the city, what city? Jerusalem. Remember, it's the center of the feast. So she can't find him anywhere. She needs to find somebody in particular. She needs to find the watchman. Because if you don't find the watchman, then you won't understand the appointed times. We need to seek him at his appointed times. Not that he can't always be found. The gates, of repentance are always open to us. But there's specific things set on specific schedules. From the creation, from the fourth day of creation, these rounds, these wheels were set in motion, and it's Adonai driving them. And it's by his grace he hasn't run over us. Because we consistently get in the way because we don't know the appointed times. We consistently play under the wheels because we don't know the appointed times. But he says, even the storks know the times, but my people don't know. So his people need to find him. It's not that they haven't been seeking him. They have been seeking him, but they could not find him. Why could they not find him? Because they didn't recognize the feast, the appointed times of the holy city. That holy city functions on that schedule. It's like looking for a bus when it's not scheduled to arrive. Until you know the bus's time schedule, there's no point making your rounds around the bus station. But if you can run into an employee who knows the appointed times that the bus is scheduled to stop, they can say, be here at this point. Well, the watchmen of Jerusalem know the appointed times of the feast, and they can tell you if they see you wandering around, they can say, hey, come at Passover, gates open. Right? The wheels are safe at that time, right? Shavuot, gates are open. The fall feast, gates are going to be open. So you don't have to just wander around looking for him for a specific intervention when he's already told you the specific times and places that he intends to be. And so this bride who's seeking him, she is a bride, by the way, she has just lost her perception. She's wandering around looking for him, but not knowing how to find him. When she finds the watchman, she says, have you seen him whom my soul loves? She understands the greatest commandment. She knows she is to love the Lord her God with all her heart, soul, and strength. She knows she's supposed to obey the commandments. But apparently, she doesn't know the times. So it says, hardly had I left them. Who? The watchman. Hardly had I left the watchman. Hardly had I left the people who make the rounds, hasovavim, who know the way that the rivers of Eden run, who know how the chariot wheels of Ezekiel move, because the four living creatures who drive those wheels, they drive 100% according to the will of Elohim. They don't make up their own rules. They don't make up their own routes. They do exactly what he says, when he says, how he says. And until you get into sync with those wheels, those sovavim, then you're going to have a hard time finding him, whom your soul loves. Now, you already have a preliminary relationship with him. So you see how this takes you so much deeper? I have a relationship with him, but I'm having trouble finding him right now. Well, how do you find him? Go to the watchman. Go to the city. Go to the watchman. Now, remember the streets and the public squares, if you've done workbook 1, about how wisdom goes and she cries in the streets and the public squares, Chokhmah, Bina, the 7 spirits that flow on that pattern of the rivers of Eden, that flow within the feasts, right there. It's using the same language. You go into those places where the spirit moves. You go in those places where the spirit of wisdom dwells. And there you seek him. And she said, I couldn't find him. But then I encountered the watchman, and it says, hardly had I left them when I found him, whom my soul loves. Now, is that not just a wonderful summation of our journey? Hardly had I left them when I found him, whom my soul loves. The point of the Shema, love him with all your heart, soul, and strength. How is that ever going to be fulfilled? He says, go to the watchman and you're going to find me. So it says, I held on to him and I would not let him go until I had brought him to my mother's house and into the room of her who conceived me. And we'll have to, of course, wait till we get down to verse 4 to understand who the mother's house is, or where the mother's house is. But basically it's bringing him back into that relationship of the tabernacle, of the Mishkan and the Mikdash. That's the mother's house. But at any rate, I thought if we don't look at the whole context, those first 4 verses of chapter 3, then it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But if we add this in terms of the night watches, all right, because it's describing something that occurs. It's an action that occurs in the night watches. What do you do first? In the first watch of the night, you say the Shema. But then a time comes, something wakes you up. You realize he's close, and you say, I must arise now. It's a resurrection pointer. Your soul knows, because your soul loves him, you know the resurrection is close. And so you know you need to get up and go seek him. You want that closer relationship to him than you ever had before. And you look and you look and you can't find him. And I don't know how many of you did that. I know I did. In fact, the prayer right before we found our group, our Torah group, the prayer I prayed on the way home from work one night was, Father, you said in your word, you'll seek me and you'll find me when you search for me with all your heart. And I said, oh, and I believe that. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to seek you. But if I don't find you, I'm not going back to church. There's something wrong with me. I don't fit in there. I never completely have. I don't understand why. Love the word, love Yeshua, but I don't fit there. There's a part of me that's missing when I sit there. And I'm going to seek you, but if I don't find you, I'm not going back to church. I'll still read my Bible, I'll still pray, but I can't go back there. I'm not going to settle anymore. And I think this is exactly the process that each of you went through. I think this is why we know we are in an important generation. Because yes, we already had a relationship with the Holy One. We loved him with all our heart, soul, and strength. We called upon him. Maybe we didn't specifically say the Shema, but we had that relationship with him. Our soul loved him. But there came a point when the Spirit came to us and said, arise now. Go look for him, because you're going to encounter somebody who will help you find him. And the gate that you're going to have to go through is my feasts. The gate you're going to have to go through is my Sabbaths. When you find that gate, when you find the watchman on the walls who can point you in that direction, you will truly find the one whom your soul has loved all this time. And now you're going to be able to hang on to him. And don't you dare let him go. Don't you dare let him go. Because you will find him whom your soul loves, not the one that's been filtered through human expectation and human molding and twisting and putting into certain boxes and so forth. But you will find the one whom your soul has loved and has always loved. And once you find him, you don't let him go. You don't let him go. And so this is why we're looking at the night watches. We'll continue this tomorrow, obviously, because we're not done. But as we're looking back at what Berachot 3a said about the watches, then it's going to help us understand why I think Yeshua would mention the second and the third watches as possible times of the master's return. he puts it with the mention of a banquet, in which actually the master serves the servant. And we know that tradition tells us that when a righteous person enters into the Garden of Eden, then a banquet is part of that experience. That first it says Adam will greet you with great joy, and then you will sit down at a table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Yeshua echoed that tradition. You'll sit down at the table with them, and you will be served that meal with your fathers. So the second watch of the night, what if you get caught up in the second watch of the night? You know, are there prophecies we can associate with the second and the third watches of the night? There are, that we can associate with the second watch of the night. But the reason I wanted to skip forward to chapter 3 is, don't skip the Shema in the first watch. Even if we're pretty sure that something significant is going to happen in the second watch, the implication, and I think by skipping it, that Yeshua is giving us is, don't skip that. Don't stop seeking me on your bed at night. When you lie down, say the Shema, affirm the commandments. Because if you don't affirm those commandments, how will you ever find it? You won't even understand what the watchmen are saying. You won't understand the second watch of the night if you didn't seek him on your bed at night in the first watch. But this second watch of the night, which is really significant, because Yeshua, I think, puts more emphasis on the second watch. Because when it gets to the third, he says, well, even the third, right? But he doesn't seem real impressed with waiting till the third watch of the night. It's more like the second watch. So if he were to appear in the second watch of the night, and again, just put it back in the context of Passover, that's fresh in your mind right now, and what happened with the death of the firstborn and so forth. But we went over the story of Gideon specifically because we knew it was associated with Passover, with the first fruits of the barley harvest. And weirdly, Gideon is threshing in a wine vat. And we saw that in Revelation 14, that the angel who starts reaping the grapes for the wine press of the wrath of Adonai, he's using the wrong tool. It's kind of a smash and grab sort of thing. It's if you're going to harvest grapes, there's a specific pruning knife that you use to collect the grapes. It's pretty surgical. But this angel is using the exact same tool as the son, one like the Son of Man used to harvest the grain. So it's when we see Gideon, of course, threshing in the wine vats, say, well, there's a connection here, and we'll get into that more tomorrow. But we know that it was in the second watch of the night when Gideon's 300 blew the shofars. So you heard the shofar sounds in the second watch of the night, just as the second watch of the night is beginning, is when this was set up to occur. He smashes the earthen vessels, which again, it makes you think of the beast's feet and toes. The iron is intermingled with the clay. And then we saw in the image of the beast of King Nebuchadnezzar, that the image was destroyed by a stone cut out without hands. So we're getting clues here that it could be that a great journey of wrath begins at about the second watch, that the beast's feet and toes will possibly be smashed by the stone at this time, with the voice, obviously, of the shofar. Because we already knew that the setting of Gideon's story was in Pesach. We know he's making matzah. We know that the enemy has this vision of a round barley loaf rolling into the tent of the Midianites and upending it. And by the way, I think probably most of you have read the 144,000 harps, the Becky book. But if you haven't, you can go back through the old YouTube videos and find it. Because if you start doing the calculations of the revenge on the Midianites for the sin that they seduced the Israelite men into, once you start doing the math that was associated with taking revenge on the Midianites for the adultery and the idolatry, when the anointed one of war stood up, Pinchas, if you remember that, if you take out the tribe of Dan, which is missing in that particular list in Revelation, when it talks about the 144,000, you start doing the math between the Torah portion and what's listed in Revelation, you come up with 144,000. And the reason I mentioned the books, because I did the math in there for you. I'm not great at math, but at least I put the math calculation. It was simple enough, even I could do it, but you could still go back in the YouTube videos and find it. But at any rate, the prophetic value of understanding this battle that Gideon has with the Midianites, again, throws us right back into a mindset of Passover. The idea being, don't wait until the fall feasts. Get ready to be counted at Pesach. Be alert in the first watch. Say the Shema, don't delay. In the second watch of the night, be alert. Some things could get smashed up in the second watch of the night. And if you begin to see these things being smashed up, maybe the message Yeshua is leaving us is, hey, go ahead and say the Shema. If you let the first watch slip by you, say it in the second watch. And don't just say it. Love him, seek him. And when you find him, don't let go of him. But if you wait until the third watch, you're running a great risk. And I'm going to show you, maybe in the next lesson, how Yeshua mentions the specific sounds that are associated with the passing of the third watch and moving into the next day, the sunrise. And if you heard these sounds, you would have missed it. You would have lost that opportunity to seek him, find him, grab a hold of him, and not let him go until you brought him into your mother's house, which is, again, it's a spiritual reference. So we'll stop there for tonight. Hard to stop on that one because it's such good material. And I apologize, the dogs have been doing horrible things. I don't know if you can hear them or not, but they're sleeping hard and they're not just snoring tonight. They've had a big day. Yeah, I like that. You don't have to get ready if you stay ready. And if you follow the commandments, how would you not be ready? Unless you were just, like I say, ticking off a box. There's no point in that. But each of these commandments, they're written to us to teach us how to stay engaged and how to constantly seek him and never rest until we can get our hands on him. And every human being has to go through that process for himself or herself. But it's like, to me, it's like the parting of the Red Sea, that a generation out of nowhere would wake up one morning, let me study Torah, let me keep Shabbat, let me find out what's, Bible food. Let me find out about these feasts. And you actually jumped over that obstacle when somebody told you those were Jewish things. That didn't deter you. You jumped over that obstacle and says, I will not be denied. And I will find the watchman who will explain this to me. Every one of you went on that journey, and you were on that journey, and we are finding him. And so it's quite an honor to be searching the city with you guys.
Amen.
I double that.
And see, even with this class, depending on your time zone, talk about like hurry the commandment. It's often, well, it's almost always after midnight before I get to bed in my time zone with the Monday night class. And that's why it helps to have that routine to say, I will not go to sleep until I say the Shema. And if it's something like, okay, if I'm about to have my coffee and that's something I do every day until I form the habit, then I will say, you know what, I won't drink the coffee until I say the Shema. And that makes you alert. It makes you mindful. And plus you can match it up with something physical to remind you to say it before the day gets away. Because if I go ahead and have my coffee, phone's going to ring, puppy's going to have an accident. There's going to be a whole chain of things that are going to distract me. And then I'm getting to an age where like, did I do it or did I not do it? And so if I have that marker, this is okay, I know I didn't drink my coffee before I said the Shema. And there's my coffee cup, so I know I said it. I know you guys aren't that forgetful, but if things start happening really fast, you can forget whether you did or you didn't do something. And that's the point that they're making about go ahead and do it in the first night watch. Don't get caught up in a wedding celebration or a feast celebration or something, because you might forget. And it's just urging spiritual mindfulness is what it's all about. Somebody's got a hand up here. Who's that? Mary LaFontaine?
Real quick, Lisa, you're still recording.
Oh, let me stop that because it's mostly snoring at this point.